if we can get started here. I'm Steve Doty. I'm the president of the board of directors for Pearl Chase Society, and thanks everyone for coming out tonight. This is the beginning of our second year for the Killam to Forest speaker series, and we're pleased tonight to have Nicole Hernandez from the city historian to give us a talk. Coming up, I just want to mention, coming up in June, we're going to have a two-part or two architect discussion. Cass Ensberg and Leslie Colas are going to be talking about a path to preserving tradition. So just mark your calendars for June 7th. That'll be our next event. As this is a free event, open to the public, we just asked that you consider a donation. We have a little box outside. Notice we're starting to get some nice fill in that box tonight. But also, if you have any inkling of joining our society, we'd highly recommend it. If you have a historic background or have an interest in historic preservation, just go to our website at pearlchase.org. pearlchasesociety.org, I'm sorry. I want to especially thank the donors, board of directors, and all the members that showed up tonight. We have a nice gathering. And I want to mention also, we'll have wine and cheese afterwards, as we usually do. We'll be outside after the program. Housekeeping, there's some bathrooms, I understand, behind the stage, I guess the ones aren't open now in the back this way, so you can use the bathrooms toward the back of the room. Nicole Hernandez brings a wealth of expertise. She has a master's degree in architectural preservation and fine arts. She's got over 20 years of experience in the field. She's been at Denver, she's been in New Orleans, she's been in Santa Barbara since I think 2012, is it? And she's really doing a great job, I must say. She's a real pro history historian and or preservation historian. She's also the recipient of the John Pittman Memorial Award. So I want to give her a nice warm welcome right now as she comes up and gives her talk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can you all hear me? I'm a little soft-spoken. Okay, great. So I just want to start by a quote from one of our Historic Landmarks Commission members. If you don't know, I work for the Historic Landmarks Commission, helping to designate and identify historic resources. And one of our members said, we have in Santa Barbara just a world-class collection of architecture, and it's really due to the diversity of types of architecture. I know we're all known for some really magnificent Spanish colonial revival buildings, but we really have an incredible repertoire, and not only just in the buildings themselves, but in the architects and the people who used them throughout the years. And I'm going to try and go through some of those behind the scenes stories of the buildings, as well as a couple restoration projects and what we've done behind the scenes to save them. As you'll see, a couple of these were set for the wrecking ball. And I'm going to start with sort of the mid-1800s and move forward in time. So I'm going to start with this little house, which is actually just around the corner on the 200 block of East De La Guerra. This was an example of how this whole neighborhood looked. It was all little Victorian cottages in the late 1870s. And this is the last little remaining one. It was sort of surrounded by all parking lots when I first moved here. And what makes it really significant, it was also the house of Luisa Ignacio. Luisa Ignacio lived here from 1908 to 1922, and she was a Chumash woman, and she's in the photograph. Oh, right where it happened. There. There we go, okay. So she's the woman in the photograph, in the historic photograph of the building. And not only was she a Chumash woman, but she was one of the last speakers known to speak Barbareño Chumash language. And this house really memorializes that she helped preserve the history and folklore and culture of the Chumash language by having linguists record her speaking But she was also born and raised in the mission, and the priest raised her to be a servant and sent her to be a maid in a white household, from which she ran away and was married at age 16 and then had 15 children. So she was an amazing person. A lot of her descendants are still in Santa Barbara. And in 2016, this building came to me for a proposal to be demolished for a housing project. And luckily, the Santa Barbara Conservancy organization had just nominated this house and brought to my attention the importance of the house in Luis Ignacio. So we designated the house a landmark in 2017, and we worked with the architect to save it as part of the housing project. So this is the after photo after it was preserved, and we did a color analysis, so it has the original paint colors, and they even restored the little widow's peak back on it because it was missing it in the before picture. You can see way up there. And this is an Italianate house, and you can see it has these really thin columns there, and they've mimicked the columns in the new development down there. So it has some continuity going across the street across the sidewalk from old to new, and really looks a lot better than this poor house sitting around a sea of parking lots. Our next, moving a little ahead in time, well, kind of the same time, the 1870s, this is a little house that was moved to the Genealogical Society property, which is over there on 320 Castillo, way down off the freeway. And this little house represents the kit houses of the Queen Anne era. And these came to Santa Barbara starting in 1872 due to the building of Stearns Wharf. Before 1872, they really couldn't get these kit houses into Santa Barbara off the big steamers. And so when Stearns came to Santa Barbara, he was a lumber merchant, and he built the wharf and brought these. The kits came with everything from like those beautiful porch posts, the bay windows, and the trusses, and all the wood that any carpenter could put together. And they were really popular after the California gold rush in California. And you can see in Santa Barbara with their 1, 2, 3 right there in this photograph from East Haley Street. These are all identical to the one at the Genealogical Society. And fortunately, as most of you know, none of these are on East Haley Street anymore. It's just now very commercial. So what we did find is that the one from the Genealogical Society was moved from 322 Bath Street because the 101 freeway came through and they had to move it. So the freeway came through here, so they moved it. And we don't know what happened to its twin, but we know that those are the two identical kit houses when they're in their original location. And I did locate 3 more identical kit houses that are still standing. This is one on Upper Anacapa on the far. I have to switch back and forth with the pointer and the... This is way up on Upper Anacapa across from Crush Cakes. And these two sit on East Figueroa Street right next to each other, although the mature trees are hard to photograph, but these were also moved to the site in 1930. So they might have been those ones that we saw on East Haley Street. So moving a little further in time, this is about 15 years later, where the Queen Anne's are still really popular in Santa Barbara. This is a little more ornate style with those beautiful windows you can see on the 2nd floor. And this house had the front porch enclosed, and the Queen Anne's really aren't complete without their open, beautiful porches. This house was designated in 2016 to qualify for one of our really popular programs of the city. Is we offer a property tax reduction in exchange for restoration of the buildings to help incentivize restoring the buildings. And we've had this one started to pull off that enclosed porch, and underneath you can see all those beautiful spindles that were part of the original Queen Anne underneath the porch once we pulled it off, so that we were able to have the porch restored to match the original spindles. And you can see it's really like the Queen Anne is really sitting on her throne now. And I love it. And they were even able to, and this house, if you don't know, you're with the Pearl Chase Society, this is Pearl Chase's house. And it went through a huge restoration in 2016 and 2017. One of the biggest issues was major dry rot underneath all the beams. So they had to take off most of the siding, repair all the beams, and restore the house. Pearl Chase's family lived here from 1905 through 1979. So this family who bought it also used the property tax credit to restore it, and they also restored all the windows. And this window restoration was really intense. This is the original windows they restored, the ropes and pulleys were restored, and these are beautiful weather strippings put in. And now I have a beautiful photo of what they look like after, including the leaded glass and the upper transoms are still there. This property owner also restored all the hardware that was missing and the tiles in the fireplace that were missing. So he was a really loving property owner. And this is the house all restored back to its original configuration for the next 100 years, we hope, at least. So moving down to the Lower East Side of Santa Barbara, I wanted to really touch on another part of the community is the African American community. And by the 1920s, they were really starting to settle and develop a vibrant, closely knit community with their own businesses, churches, social clubs, and other institutions along East Haley Street. And this is a picture of East Haley Street. And this is the AME, African American Church. You can see it in the 1920 photograph, and this is when we designated it in 2020. It was constructed in 1916 as an African American church and really a safe haven and oasis for many members of the African American community. After the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, much of the community wanted us to work designating more sites representing the African American community. And this gave me a really great opportunity to work with Healing Justice, a really activist community with African American community, and the State Historic Preservation Office. They gave us a grant to research the whole history of the community and identify the buildings that represented. This is one of them. And this is the African American community in front of the church in the 1950s. And this is a photograph of why they need a safe haven in Santa Barbara. In 1923, there's the KKK symbol and cross rising above the Riviera, above East Gutierrez Street. We too had racial discrimination here. And what we learned in that historic context statement was some really amazing stories of people who are doing amazing trailblazing activities, and one of this was Dr. Frances Ford, and she actually was a Black woman who was a podiatrist trained in San Francisco and came here and had her offices with Dr. Helen Sexton in the San Marcos building. So it's the San Marcos building had already been designated a landmark, but we edited the landmark designation to tell this story about these amazing women who were not fitting in their domestic role and were working in the professional field, and which was pretty unheard of in the 1920s. After we did the context statement, we had some more people bring us stories about amazing feats of what women and people were doing in Santa Barbara, and this was a photograph sent to me by a woman this was her mother, who was a Rosie the Riveter here in Santa Barbara, and the Rosies were women who went to work in the manufacturing factories during World War II. A lot of times it was an amazing opportunity for them to get out of the domestic roles, which they've been forced into. And there's a whole documentary on the Black Rosies of World War II out that just released, I think, last year. And there were 600,000 African American women in the country who became Rosie the Riveters. And we know of one in Santa Barbara, but we have a smaller community. I think it's really exciting. The other photograph that was given to me was this beautiful photograph of the children in front of Lincoln School. Lincoln School is more of a tragedy of historic preservation before it became really a big effort. This is the school being constructed in the 20s. This is a beautiful photograph of what it looked like. And now it's the parking lot where the farmer's market is on Saturday morning. They tore it down in the 1970s. Although I did see in the 1960s planning document that the planners recommended it to be torn down. It's just unfortunate to lose really exquisite architecture like that and a place that was considered just a safe haven for, and remarkably an integrated school in the 1940s. This is one more African American church that we designated. This sits off of Gutierrez Street, just off State Street. The congregation moved out in the early 2000s and it was going into disrepair, and it recently has a new owner who just finished the restoration. And look, he really did such a beautiful job with restoring all the stained glass and bringing the exterior of the building back to its really elegant glory. It was built in 1926 and was an African American congregation for almost 100 years. And now it's been restored as well. And one more quick story about the African American community and the projects we worked on. We partnered with the Santa Barbara Trust for Historic Preservation, who owns this building, to work with an intern, a minority student intern, to help inspire them to go into the history or historic preservation field. And I was able to work with this young African American woman whose family is from Santa Barbara. And I just wanted to read to you her statement about the project. She said, "My great-grandparents settled in Santa Barbara in the 1950s after fleeing race-based Jim Crow violence in Arkansas. They've helped the Black community grow ever since, and she drove up here in 2023 to photograph these properties she would be researching about African American history, and her grandfather accompanied her, and he loved seeing the houses, history, and people she would be researching, one of which was Dr. McMillan. Dr. McMillan was the first African American doctor in Santa Barbara, and he also was a real important activist and civil rights leader in Santa Barbara. He also was one of the first African American families that was able to live on the Mesa, yet he was turned down housing on Mission Ridge Road due to his race. And then she also found a beautiful photograph of her grandmother in 1963, advertising the Pan American grocery store. So I'm gonna kind of switch gears to another community that was living in the Lower East Side in Santa Barbara as well, which was the Italian community. And this house was a little craftsman style house that was on Old Coast Highway, and it was the home of the Perini family. They lived there from 1923 to 1960, and it came also to us for the Wrecking Ball, as it was going to be cleared for housing. And this is important to kind of illustrate that this whole neighborhood was Italian American at the time. Many members living in the Lower East Side all the way up through Old Coast Highway. Yet after 1960, many of the Italian community moved into the suburbs, and the old small homes were no longer desirable, and many of them were demolished. This was like a lone survivor of the community, and this is what its neighbors looked like at the time. And so in our efforts to look at how to save this little building, because it was a remnant and a representative of the Italian community that once lived here, the owner found a place to move it to. So they loaded it up, and this is it getting on stilts ready to go on a truck all the way across town to 805 Olive Street. And here's the foundation they built to put it on when it arrives. And here it is in its new home with a restored facade. They were able to save the beautiful transom window that's all leaded glass and such a beautiful pattern that came with it. And the whole restoration's almost done. It took years, but it's one little victory, and this little craftsman made it. Another example of the Italian community's homes, this one's more towards Alameda Padre Serra. This was actually built by Arcangelo Goggia in 1933 for his own house. He was a stonemason, and here he is in his craft, and this is the house he built himself for his family. You can see the Riviera is kind of blank behind it still. He also helped build Trinity Church, as well as restore the mission after the 1925 earthquake. And he carved the sandstone spheres that are at the courthouse on the pillars to the entrance of the courthouse. And his family owned this all the way till 2017. And there's some really beautiful pictures of his stonework inside the house as well. You can see the beautiful mantle he built and the arched, beautiful coved ceiling, and this is the chimney he built. So this was designated historic, and the new owners using the property tax reduction program to help restore the house. And of course, no conversation is complete without Arnaldi's, which is really the last remnant of the Italian community down there that we know definitely, that everybody knows in town. If you didn't know, it was built by Joe and Ida Arnaldi. Joe was also a stonemason that came from the Lake Como area of Italy, and he and his wife opened the restaurant in 1940, and the bocce ball court behind was original. They built that right with it. And he quarried the stone himself. And when we did do this as an actual full landmark at City Council, his granddaughter was at the hearing, very teary, and mentioned how wonderful it was that we were recognizing our immigrant population's contributions to our community. Just really sweet. And one more contribution of the Italian community in Santa Barbara is Alex D'Alfonso. He was a designer of many of the buildings in Santa Barbara. He started designing in the 1920s, so he did lots of Spanish colonial revival style buildings, and he designed for 6 decades. So this is a later building in 1937 that he designed in the Streamlined Moderne building, one of our very few of that style. And he also designed several mid-century modern buildings up on the Riviera, almost like whole neighborhoods of buildings. And we do have on our website, I want to just pause here and say, we do have on our website architecture and designer biographies that you can look at their bios and look at all the buildings that we know of that they built all in one place. So that's a resource if you're looking for that. Oh, oops. And I just wanted to point out the only other Streamlined Moderne building I know of in the city. We also designated as a structure of merit in 2020. This one's down in West Beach. But I do think it's great that even though it has all the streamlined features, it has this little Santa Barbara touch of the clay tile coping, just to give it that little Santa Barbara Spanish look. I'm gonna switch to just really talking about some of the diverse architectural styles we see in Santa Barbara. We already saw one craftsman, but craftsman really needs a huge conversation because it is one of the most popular styles in Southern California and Santa Barbara as well. The craftsman hit California by storm starting in the early 1900s. It really was so popular, you can see it all over Southern California today, but not always as in good condition or in large amounts. The bungalows really helped fulfill so many Americans' dream of owning their own home, because with the climate and economic opportunities in California, the people moved westward, tons of them. The population increased by over 50%. And these craftsman bungalows were springing up because the Ready Cut Bungalow Company could ship the whole kit for them. And they shipped about 40,000 to Southern California between 1910 and 1920s. And they were only about $650. And they were simple and developed here, lots of similar to the Victorian kit homes, actually, but different styles. They really became just such a part of the California visual motif, just like palm trees and orange groves and craftsman bungalows. And what people loved about them is the new style. It really eschewed all the Victorian elements. So it was this very simple style, and these tapered columns are like the key craftsman element, I think, as well as these knee brackets and all the decorative shingling. And this one still has leaded glass windows in the upper sash, like the other one we saw. So they're just really lovely, and they have those big front porches that really make them pleasant before the time of air conditioning. And we see them in several different iterations throughout the city. And one was in our bungalow courts. bungalow courts are a great solution for rental housing, and they started in Pasadena in 1909, and we had our first one built in 1910. And this one has two, they're really hard to photograph because it's so built up on De La Vina, but there's two twins, like this one here, of these high style craftsmen. And behind each one is 7 cottages in these rows, and there's a driveway down the middle. And they still serve as rental housing today, this one. So this court had 16 buildings in it. And moving a little further in time, this is another bungalow court built in 1916 in a totally different style, the Mission Revival style. This one has an incredible amount of detail in this beautiful play along the parapets. And they have a garden in between the courts, and then it ends at a big apartment building at the end. And this one, I just love these details. This is why I love old architecture. I mean, look at these windows, these arched windows. Aren't they incredible? And they play with the rectangular forms. So just an exquisite example of rental housing. Here's another craftsman bungalow court built in 1919. This one did not stay all under one owner. They divided up the 12 identical bungalows and sold them off individually I think in the late 40s. And this one is the only one that's been designated so far. But you can see they're all exactly identical. They go along Mitchell, Traina, and Olive. And then inside is the bungalow court. You can't really see it from the street, but you can see it from the alley. And these 4 face each other with a little path down the middle. They really make, or they did really make rental housing feel like you owned your own home. I think, oh, there it goes. And then the bungalow courts, as we progressed in the style changes of the city, we got to see them in the Spanish colonial revival style. This one is so expressive with the, you start to see these amazing arches and towering chimneys, and this one they mirror each other as they go down the court. So as you cross the lawn there, they're the exact mirror image, but as you go down. And the last court I'm gonna feature is this one, and this one was actually designed by a high-end architect, Lionel Prius, who also designed our Botham building that faces the Plaza de la Guerra. And the court was designated in 2018 as historic, the Botham building in 2019. And I'll just say a few things about Lionel Prius because he was a really great architect who came to help rebuild Santa Barbara after the 1925 earthquake. He was paid for by the Botham Fund, which promised to give $300,000 to rebuild some of Santa Barbara, and he designed some of these buildings. They do, you can see his signature beautiful pointed arch in both buildings, here and here. And this Spanish colonial revival is considered one of the key buildings to rebuilding Santa Barbara because it eliminated the last vestiges of the old typical American town and built this Spanish colonial revival building on Plaza de la Guerra, kind of making all of Plaza de la Guerra Spanish with colonial revival as you go around it. And this is a great Spanish colonial revival style because it shows the play on different volumes, forms, balconies, arches, these amazing towering chimneys. And at the same time, some of the designers were doing some more formal Mediterranean style buildings. And this one was only built in 1924, but you can see how balanced it is and symmetrical compared to more of a Spanish colonial revival, which has more of a tower element. This almost looks like an Italian Renaissance formality to it. And this building went under some really beautiful restoration, and I have a few pictures of it. This is the beautiful arch of the Masonic Temple, and the stone was falling and really soiled. And so we worked with a mason to start poulticing out, leaching out all the dirt off the stone, and here it is cleaned at the final. And then he also, when it was done, he has a really talented hand, and he patchworked all the falling stone back. And then he went to the top of the loggia And it was like a great day at work for me because I got to climb the scaffold to get these photographed. But you can see this is the original color of the paint, and it had faded. So he was restoring the paint back to this. And here's how he's going to restore the gold leafing to the little rosettes. So the top of that loggia will be restored. I wanted to look, this is another example of more of that Mediterranean style. It's very symmetrical and all the arches are very formal, and that's sort of a signature. Sewell, Murphy, and Hastings, they're one of the most prominent architects to start designing a lot of State Street after the earthquake. And this building, you can see what it looked like in its early years as a hotel. And this is when we designated it in 2020, right when it was about to go under a restoration. And this is it right after it reopened as a hotel again. You can see we found all the beautiful glass underneath the storefront and saved these beautiful corners. And they also were able to do an addition on the end to allow some extra room for the new hotel and a third story. So adaptive reuse and working with the property owners to make the buildings work while we save the facades is a lot of how we try and make sure that they keep being relevant into the future. Just because we mentioned Sewell, Murphy, and Hastings, I thought it was perfect because they also designed this building. This was all an art school campus at one point in the 1920s. It didn't survive the Depression, but they designed this building to be the campus theater in 1925, and it was designated a historic building in 2018. And I always feel like when you talk about Sewell, Murphy, and Hastings, you need to talk about Edwards and Plunkett, because I feel like on every block of State Street, you see one of their buildings. And we know Edwards and Plunkett designed the Arlington, and they designed the terminal at the airport, but they also designed this amazing building on the corner of Ortega and Santa Barbara Street. I love this tower with the balcony hanging over it. And then they also designed some residential buildings this one's up in San Roque area, built in 1929. And this one's also under a restoration property tax reduction program for restoration. So that's been a very successful program, obviously. We have 75 contracts in the city. So another great day at work is when the property owner of a hidden, for me it was hidden, Reginald Johnson house calls and says, I'd like you to come up and just designate my house because I love it. Not because we're forcing you to, not because you want a tax reduction, just because you love it. And this was the case with this Reginald Johnson house. We don't have a lot of the big houses up on the Riviera on our radar because we can't really see them. So this was up at 1915 in Las Tunas. It was designed in 1929, and it's just this high-style, gorgeous building with these beautiful doors and even detailing under the eaves. Reginald Johnson designed the Clark Estate. He designed our post office downtown, and he also designed the Biltmore. He was one of the most famous architects in Southern California at the time. This house was designed by Anna Louise Murphy Vey, and I just want to talk a little bit about this amazing women that were designing in the 1920s too, including Anna Murphy Vey. She's not quite as popular as some of the others. She joined Julia Morgan, who was world famous in architecture, Mary Craig, who designed the buildings across from the Mission at the Rose Garden, and Luda Maria Riggs, who helped design the Libero Theater. She designed this little house up in the Riviera, and this was a little hidden gem too. And this came through another program we have at the city, and it's more dictated by state law, is that we look at every building that comes in that's over 50 years old to see if it would qualify to be historic. That way we don't lose any buildings that we don't know about to demolition or to inappropriate alterations without first evaluating them. And so this one came in and we found it was historic, and we designated it. And she actually we found this beautiful storyboard that she did for a house competition held by House Beautiful. with the original facades, site plan, and the beautiful interiors. And this was held out at UCSB Archives, so that's a great source if you are looking for history. So that kind of brings us to what else was going on in the 1920s in Santa Barbara, which was the small house movement of the 1920s. So we had our beautiful Spanish buildings downtown and this great movement coming forward, but also starting in 1919, the American Institute of Architects founded this Architects Small House Service Bureau. It grew into a national program called the Better Homes in America, and by 1926, Santa Barbara won the Better Homes in America competition nationwide. And this recognition really gave the city a position of unquestionable leadership in the value of small quality design. 8 of those 10 houses that were submitted in 1926 are still standing and in good integrity, and we've identified most of them. And this couldn't have happened without Pearl Chase's leadership, along with Bernard Hoffman and Carlton Winslow in 1924, starting our own small house movement, and they issued a whole book of small house plans. The idea is these architects donate their plans, give you a book, and people who can't afford a high-end architect can get the patterns and start building homes that they can afford. And this was the idea to get better quality housing out to many of American streetscapes. This little one is now a designated historic building because it was part of that competition. And I think they're getting ready to take off those shutters that they glued on there in the 50s, so it'll look more like that. There was a window salesman guy in the 50s that went through all the neighborhoods. So just when we talk about small houses and why sometimes we're so strict about windows at the city, this house, they put in the vinyl windows without and just demolished the original. And you can see how the windows really add to the character and beauty of the building. We went from something really expressive and sweet to something that really doesn't speak to the community or the street at all anymore. And that is my demonstration photo of why I'm so strict about windows. Another player in that 1926 small house movement was this house. This was an old barn that Sewell Murphy and Hastings, who we talked about earlier, converted into a Spanish style house with this beautiful expressive balcony. And this house as well, a totally different style that we haven't really talked about yet, but the Tudor style house. And you can see a lot of these up in the San Roque area, that this was in that competition as well. Just when San Roque was starting to be developed, and starting to get filled in with houses. And another house that was part of the competition was the Goodwill House. And this is a really good example of how Pearl Chase found this movement could also benefit the better quality housing for African American community. And she partnered with the People's Independent Church, an African American church, to build this house for the competition. You can see her, she's in the photograph, but you can also see her signature in the house with the rounded arches, the tile roof. This is all signature Santa Barbara style. And she wanted the style to be for everybody, the small houses, the people with less means, as well as the grandiose buildings and houses. And this is why they matter as well, and why we try to preserve the small ones and the big ones. And as you can see, there's some of our most vulnerable houses. This one's already been torn down. This was down in the funk zone. And that was once a thriving neighborhood of small houses for African Americans, Italians, and Asian people, because it was a thriving fishing industry and the railroad was right there, providing many labor jobs. And I'm gonna just switch gears to talk about the Asian community for a minute. We also designated Jimmy's Oriental Gardens. It was constructed in 1947, but it's also our last remnant of the Chinatown that was once across the street from the Presidio, and it was also a thriving community. Here's a picture of when this was a Chinatown. This is the Libero and the El Centro building are here on right off of State and East Canna Perdido, but this was a really thriving block of Chinatown at the time. And we also found that the Hill Carrillo adobe was once a Chinese laundry. And we do want to look, this has been a landmark for a long time for its adobe history, but it's important to tell the whole story about all the people in our community. We're going to rewrite a little bit of that landmark to make sure that people know it was also important to the Chinese community and a business for that community as well. And we recently, actually just last month, designated this California modern style house that's up in the Riviera historic, as it was built for a Chinese family, the Kong family, who owned a shop down on State Street. But it represents a time when the demographics of the Chinese Americans were changing, and the racial barriers were lifting, and they could move into other neighborhoods and move out of Chinatown, as well as there were a lot of second and third generation Chinese people who were becoming more affluent and could hire an architect to design their house. And the owner received a letter from the son whose father built this house, and he really indicated that the red door was so important in Chinese culture that really it represented a welcome, the color. And the mid-century, this always had these walls of glass that really brought nature in, so your house felt like it was part of nature. And so I wanted to just point out, what I've talked a lot about today is like the remnants of neighborhoods, and we've saved one here and one there of what neighborhoods used to be, which is why I think it's really important to work to preserve our intact collections of buildings. We have over 100 Craftsman bungalows all together in the Bungalow Haven neighborhood. We have over 40 all together down by the beach at West Beach. And we have a large collection of late Victorian buildings down on Lower De La Vina. And we're lucky to have the collection still, so we work to really keep those and not end up with just one that we're trying to save from the wrecking ball. And they've become significant as a whole altogether rather than one by one. And moving a little bit further in time, we designated this Thornton Ladd house in 2022. It was another example of when the owner just called me and said, I want to have this beautiful Thornton Ladd house designated. Thornton Ladd was a really important mid-century architect in the 1950s. And we were really lucky to have one of his houses, again, really simple, really streamlined, focused on the glass wall that kind of lets the garden in. Here's another example of the house from another corner, really set into nature. You wouldn't know it had this beautiful garden when you see it off of Garden Street, but it does. And this is the house right after it was finished in 1956, just another view of it. This is Thornton Ladd here. And I just have a couple pictures with his other work. He designed this restaurant in Newport Beach. He designed the whole Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena. And if you don't recognize that church, it's from The Graduate, the movie. So iconic. No, a lot of people at my office didn't know what The Graduate was. You have to see it. So I want to end my discussion about the diversity in the community with the designation of Casa de la Raza in 2020. Casa de la Raza has this amazing, iconic tower that was built in 1930, and it's over there on East Montecito Street, and it was a lumber yard for a long time, but in 1970, the owner donated it to be Casa de la Raza, a community center and safe haven for the Latinx community of Santa Barbara. And it became, a community center with like sports for children, they had boxing matches for kids. Cesar Chavez came to speak there. They had weddings, they had food banks, they had English lessons, they had daycare, everything the community needed. And if you haven't been inside, Manuel Anzueto's murals are in there. And he painted these in 1973, and he is a internationally famous muralist from Santa Barbara. His work is in the Smithsonian and also on the east side of the East Side Library if you want to see one that's visible. But these are exquisite and wonderful, and he also teaches at University of UCSB. He teaches art, and he often works with kids to do mural paintings. And that sort of ends the lecture on the different styles and diversity of Santa Barbara's architecture, I did just want to show you, if you go to our website, and I'll give you the website in a minute, we do have a map, and all those lit up little pieces of our map of our city are historic resources. There's a lot, and you can click on one, and a picture will come up of the building, and if you scroll down to view, you click that view, a report can come up and tell you all about the building. So it's always a work in progress. There's a staff of one, which is me, who does this. So it's not perfect, and we have one IT guy that helps me with it. So we are working on it, but it's always a work in progress. But we did just recently highlight all the Adobe structures so you can find them, and the African American sites. And that is our website, santabarbaraca.gov, historic preservation, so you can find it. I know it's hard to weave through the city's webpage. And we do have an Instagram feed that we feature a historic building a couple times a week and tell you all about it. And that is the end.
If anybody has any questions.
Questions?
Well, we have her.
Yeah.
How much does it cost to fix one of those old wood windows?
Oh, mostly if you call, we have a restoration specialist who does them for about $250 a window, $250. He'll fix the pulleys and ropes and get them back moving and get the deteriorated paint off and repaint the panes. He's the one that most of the people who do those property reduction acts projects recommend to me. They often tell me who does good work and who doesn't. And there's some more high-end ones that you can do, but it just depends on the craftsmanship. Yeah.
The kit houses from the 1800s that you mentioned, was that pre-cut or prefab?
Pre-cut. They were wood, and they pre-cut them. You know, they started getting more manufacturing tools that cut all the wood and those beautiful detailing, especially for those Victorians where they had all the intricate gingerbread work.
Will the builder's remedy provision affect any of our historic homes? I'm thinking, of course, of the hazard property on East Mission.
Well, they are not exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act, so they have to evaluate every building on the site, and if it's found historic, if they were to tear it down, they'd have to go through and they call it an environmental impact report, which takes over a year and has a 6-month public comment period, and it costs a lot of money to do. And that does not guarantee that the community, which would be the planning commission, would even still agree to allow the demolition. So it's a risky road. And I've never had anybody do it here because, as you see, most of the developers would rather just incorporate or save the building than go down that road. I just know most people don't want to even touch it.
Though that project is, has it been presented to the planning commission?
It hasn't even come in, they have not yet, so they don't have a project in yet, but when they do, they will have to do that process.
And that builder's remedy has been now moved out to a May date. Was there April 10? They had to have their projects in by April 10. Now
I haven't seen any movement on it, so I don't know if I don't know the status of it.
Okay,
I haven't seen anything at all.
thank you.
Yeah.
The Ignacio house, are they gonna put a plaque there to commemorate the the historical significance of that house?
They haven't yet, but I would like them to.
That would be great.
Yeah, it would be nice. We just started these little plaques. They don't say too much, but we're really strongly encouraging people to get them so people know at least when they were built, so they can find out more information and that they're historic. And there's more room for more information, obviously. I think it would help as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, way in the back.
I was on the Lower Riviera on Florida Road, and I got the Alfonso house, and there's a house next door to me that is going to be demolished, and they're going to build a 3-story kind of box-like structure. On the other side of that house is a Moody sisters house.
Yeah, that, I know the house, it was not found to be qualified as a historic house. So it didn't qualify on its own.
So it's okay to just demolish it?
Yes. They have to meet criteria to qualify. Yeah.
Is there a place on your website that features homes that are at risk of being torn down and the opportunity to purchase them and move them to another location?
We don't have anything like that, but I don't know any other that are at risk right now like that, right, that I can think of. But it's really hard to move a house. It was so easy, they moved them around all the time, but now the trees are mature and there's all the electricity. For that one to move, they had to do it in the night and like take down the, the light, those street lights and things. It's not an easy venture. Yeah.
It looks from your photos as if the siding on the Pearl Chase house was unpainted before renovation, or was it?
That was when the new siding was going back on because they had to take it off to repair all that dry rot. So that would have been the new going on. So it was painted. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Is the post office, been declared, is it Art Deco? You didn't mention any Art Deco buildings.
Yes.
Very few.
Yes.
Is that a landmark?
It is a landmark. Yeah. Yes. It's one of our most famous. I was trying to focus on some of the little lesser known ones, but yes, and it's one of my favorite. I love that building. Yeah.
In answering the earlier question, you mentioned the house that didn't qualify under the criteria for historical preservation. What are the criteria?
There's four pretty much. One is that it has to be 50 years old first, and then it has to either be associated with a significant person or event, or have archaeological significance, or be associated with a significant architect, or be an important and a good example of an architectural style. That's what most of them qualify under. And I think 1, 2, 3, 4. Event, person, architect, style, and it has to be intact. So it has to have a lot of its original materials. So if it's been chopped up, it's hard to find a case to save it because we don't have much left of it. So, yeah.
What do you like about your work?
My favorite part is working with the property tax reduction program. Those projects, the owners love the buildings. For the Pearl Chase house, he was so excited when he found that hardware to go on the pocket doors, and they call me and invite me up, and they really care about the buildings, and I love seeing that passion and being part of the restoration, or being in a restoration, more of the hands-on part of it. My least favorite is arguing about windows almost every day. Every day. Yeah.
I don't recall the name of the architect who you pointed out, but he said he had the arches,
Oh. Yeah. So he was a stonemason. He just designed his own house and built it. But his name was Arcangelo Goggia. So that was just his own house for his own family.
I'm thinking of the one who had the project from Delgado Plaza in the corner.
Lionel Priest.
Oh, Lionel Priest. Sorry. Yeah.
That house, I am sitting pretty far back, so I'm not know whether it's my vision or what, but was that originally shingle?
The Lionel Priest one, they were stucco, Spanish. Yeah.
Textured
Oh.
stuff.
All stucco. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Now you can go. Oh.
Yeah, I just, I was raised here, and I really appreciate any and everybody who's doing what you're doing, and I understand you're fighting the forces of money, And I think back to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember Leonard Burgess's wife, Beverly Burgess, in the 70s, saved the Fox Arlington from being demolished and turning into a parking lot. And I can't, I can understand, we're all interested in our own financial security and what have you, but such travesty, I hope, and I can see, I won't mention different properties, but I can still see that happening here.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for doing what you're doing,
Yeah.
and the more of us who can become united.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Yeah, you're really a real asset to this community. You can just see from many of those shots that the dates were well into her time here. So, and that's just a fraction of what she's done, enabling new historic structures of merit, and landmark buildings to be established here in the city. And it just keeps going. And the resource on the website is fantastic. I know that's just going to get better. We really thank her, and want to let everybody know now we can go outside. We have some wine, some water, and enjoy the sunshine. Thanks all for coming too.
Well, I don't know. I'm not and frankly, I think it needs to be renovated, just like they did. To me, yeah, it doesn't have the height. Yeah, they used to, the striker used to say 5. Yeah, before 5. Bring it on. So if you're looking at the middle, and then, on the right side, and then there's, so yes, up the hill, right, on the right. Yeah, I know they want to put some. Yeah, so right. 600. I mean, it's just, yeah, under the code. No, there's no review. It's gonna be